Welcome to the August 2020 OpenZFS leadership meeting. Let's start off with an update about the Developer Summit. So the conference, we announced the speakers this morning or last night, or whatever. So we have 11 great talks lined up for the conference. The conference is going to be October 6th to 7th. We're going to have, the first day is going to be most of the talks, second day hackathon. And you can see the speakers and the talks on the website. One thing that I think I mentioned this before, but we're going to try really hard to promote like the conversations and meeting people that we had at the in-person conference. But I think that's going to require a little bit more advanced planning than usual. So, and I think in particular the hackathon, you know, has been very free form in the past. But I worry that amount of free formity might result in a lot of newcomers not participating. And I think that one of the great things about the hackathon in the past has been that we get folks who are first-time contributors to ZFS to start writing code or writing documentation, and working with other more experienced participants. So to that end, we're going to try to do a little bit more organization around the hackathon, and we're going to ask for volunteers of folks who want to lead groups at the hackathon. So the idea would be that like you have an idea of a project or an area that you'd like to work on, and you'd like some help with it, and you're willing to you know, help other people to help you. So this could be like writing code, like I want to, you know, implement some feature and I want some folks to help me with that. Or it could be like I want to work on documentation, and I have like, you know, there's so many aspects of documentation. So like the leader there might create like a list of subtasks, like, you know, update this web page with the latest info, go, you know, delete all the out-of-date info on this other page, consolidate it from here to there, work on a man page or something like that. Or it might be like, I have an idea, but I'm not ready to start coding it, but I think that other people might have valuable input on how we should design this or where it will be useful. So there's a lot of different types of potential hackathon projects, and I think hopefully some of the folks here who are the leaders in the community will also have, you know, you'll have your own ideas and be able to lead sessions on those. So I'll be reaching out to folks, but if you have something that you would like to help other folks work on at the hackathon, then I'd love to hear from you. And we can also make time available at the beginning of the hackathon day for folks to kind of pitch their idea to the whole audience, and find folks who are interested and willing to help you out on that. So for example, I know Josh is going to be giving a short talk about the default compatible pool features that we've talked about in this meeting a couple times, and with the hope of getting folks to work with him at the hackathon on starting to implement that. Questions on the conference or the hackathon? Cool. Registration is open. You don't need to register to like view the live stream as usual, but folks will need to register to get the like Zoom links to join it live. To there'll be like time for Q&A and like hallway interaction type stuff that you will want to register for the conference to attend that way. And the registration is free this year because we don't have any t-shirt or food type costs to cover from those tickets. Cool. Let me find the next agenda. Okay. The next item that I had on the agenda was Alan. Do you want to talk about the boot once API stuff?
Maybe Tomas can share more on that.
Hello. Just a second, I need to swap the room.
Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. So yeah, we've been working on extending the boot once feature, which is called NextBoot currently in what was originally upstream from FreeBSD and what Delphix then extended to work with Grub. Although it turns out that actually kind of conflicts with a different feature in FreeBSD called NextBoot that allows you to change which kernel or provide additional environment variables in the kernel and later rather than during boot. And so we think that the name boot once fits better, and we will be implementing that along with support for NextBoot in ZFS for FreeBSD. And we started with the work that Paul Dagnelli did at Delphix to broaden and improve the format for that. And he wrote the stubs for an envy list based implementation, and Thomas has extended that and completed it. And he's going to talk a little bit about it now.
Yep. The current state of the work is that we have the working prototype, and it's been tested by myself and by some people from Netflix side with the FreeBSD. And actually, I have this feature ported in two systems, in FreeBSD and in Illumos. Just to be sure that we have different platform-specific corner cases covered and so on. What we have done is that we have switched the libzfs interface to use only envylist. And so we are sort of like assuming that the data we receive with the libzfs is already packed in envylist, and so we can propagate this data to the pool label. And in an attempt to provide support for different systems with a backward compatibility, we are trying to handle both old FreeBSD NextBoot ZFS NextBoot case and Delphix raw data stream case from reading the pool label but in case of writing, we are actually pretty much enforcing envylist-based approach. And the idea is that by using envylist in label previous path 2 area, we are allowing more flexible data structures, and we are allowing different kind of system support, because with envylist we can actually handle side by side different systems. We can allow group environment block next with FreeBSD NextBoot stuff and so on. And of course, that's entirely inside the 8 kilobyte limit. And basically that's it. The problem with the current OpenZFS implementation and this work we have done is that we kind of changed a few signatures of few functions. We did drop the string-based arguments in favor of envylist arguments. And this work has been pushed up for reviews on both FreeBSD fab site, and that's reviews.freebsd.org, and also the patch is up on review board for Illumus and Gerrit for Illumus. And we are planning really soon to start up the push request for OpenZFS as well, to get more reviewers and feedback.
Cool. Yeah, I think our biggest concern there is getting any of the API changes for libzfs in before 2.0 so that stays stable. And we talked about this, I think it was 2 months ago when we first started about, if we could manage to quickly change that interface before anybody started using it.
Sounds good to me. Questions or additional comments about this?
I did actually had a little conversation with Paul, and he already gave few bits of feedback, but I don't think it's too comprehensive right now. I mean, it probably will need some more attention from reviewer side as well. But I'm remaining quite optimistic in the sense that at least so far all the tests I have done seem to support this idea, and of course initial implementation, very initial implementation, I did drop actually the version word from the boot environment data structure, but later on we did agree to reinstate it to help to provide or recognize the need for translating the old material to support Delphix bits and to support the old FreeBSD boot next boot bits. But,
yeah, I think the one thing we noticed that was an issue there is when the integer was encoded to put in the label at the beginning to mark the what type it was host encoded, not network order encoded. So it isn't actually, it would be read differently depending on.
Yes, actually, there was a little bit catch, and catch was about the value, because the current OpenZFS implementation is actually using pretty much only the value 0 for raw material, and 0 is 0 in every system. And since we did start to use the next value, number 1, for NVList data structure, it became obvious that we actually should use the Indian specific conversions there. And yeah, we are storing the network order bytes now.
Cool, that's a good catch.
And of course, that will make it a little bit easier to recognize if we have a ASCII string stored there or not.
Yeah. In terms of the backwards compatibility, I think that probably from Delphix's point of view, we can probably deal with it either way. Like once we have the new bits, then we can just say like, okay, now like update it to you, write it out the new way and ignore the old way. So if you didn't want to support reading the old format, then I think that would probably be okay with us. But there might be other folks that do have concerns there.
Well, yeah, on FreeBSD, the raw C string's been in use for 5 or more years now, so we need to catch that. Although we can catch that by, it always starts with ZFS : so it's easy enough to detect.
Yep. And to provide a little bit more support about encoding the incoming or outgoing data to or from NVLists, I did actually create very basic library for that purpose, in hope that those interfaces might be useful. And of course, at current state, that library is built based on need, what we have seen from Illumus and FreeBSD systems. So I assume that that specific interface, if it's useful for other people, it probably will get extended in some extent. And perhaps it is good idea to integrate it with the OpenZFS code base as well, as a prototype or base function.
Cool. So I know you talked about wanting to get stuff in before 2.0. So maybe this is a good transition to hand off to Brian to talk about the 2.0 branching timeline and ideas, and also Brian, if you could talk about like dRAID and kind of where that's at in the process a little bit. You're on mute.
Yeah, thanks. I could have talked there for a long time. Yeah, sure, I can talk about that. So the plan originally was to branch in mid-August, and we are still, I would say, close to making that branching date. There are a few things that are really close to wrapping up that we would like to get in. So we're going to drag our feet for a week or so, and hopefully get a 2.0 branch out after that. So that'll get us some time to get in any last remaining FreeBSD changes we need, and some other features that are really close, like Z standard is pretty much ready to go and just needs to be merged in. So that's the plan for a 2.0 branch. And then once it's cut, we'll have something stable to base off of. Related to that, one of the other changes, hopefully to get into 2.0, will be dRAID, which is a feature that I think people have heard about for a long time. Well, it's finally a thing after many years. So this is a distributed parity implementation for ZFS. So our first new VDEV type in a long time. And it is wrapping up as well. And we'd like to get that in the 2.0 release. And it's in need of reviewers. There's a pull request open. So if people want to go look at that and kick the tires and look at the data, that would be really good. I'm happy to answer questions about any of this if people have specific questions or concerns, but that's the plan.
Cool. I'm gonna, as you know, I'm going to continue reviewing that code, and Mark maybe is going to have a talk at the conference about dRAID finally, and which I think is going to be kind of an overview of what dRAID is and the recent changes, and hopefully the status, which will be simply that it is in master by that time. Michael Dixter had a question about RAID-Z expansion in 2.0. I mean, the blocker is like that. The code is not done. So the 2.0 release and subsequent releases. I mean, the intent is that these releases are time-based, and that they wait for no feature. And we're kind of we're stretching the definition of that a little bit with this first one. But you know, if it is only a few weeks, then that'll be still a huge improvement over a huge change from what we've been doing in the past. But the RAID-Z expansion is For folks who don't know, we have resumed work on that in earnest, so progress is being made on that, but it's not, it is not weeks away from integrating by any stretch of the imagination.
Cool, thank you.
Other questions about dRAID or 2.0? All right.
Cool.
So on to our next question about versioning. Gabriel, are you on? You mentioned wanting to talk about semantic versioning with ZFS.
Yeah, I'm here. So obviously people have probably taken a look at the definitions for semantic versioning and such before, and I just wanted to bring up the topic, since there was a little movement here on branching off this patch series branch early, which was lovely to see. Thank you very much. But I wanted to kind of trigger a discussion on what do we merge in a patch branch like that. Where are we going to define bug fixes versus improvements versus new features in the context of ZFS? I'm not a developer of ZFS in any earnest. I'm mostly a user, but I wanted to express my interest in having a reasonable, stable version that just updates to support new kernels and such from a user perspective for deployments.
If we were to do semantic versioning as it is written, would that mean, I mean, under what circumstances would we have a backwards incompatible major, like to get to 3.0 then in that scheme, we would be saying that a 3.0 release would not be compatible in some way with the 2.0 release, which doesn't feel like something that we would like to do too much, I would think.
So my interpretation would be that's like on disk format changes, where if you update to that version and upgrade your on disk format, then the previous versions can no longer import it, read write. That's where I see the API, like that major version difference being.
Right. So
I think that's a bit of a stretch of the definition of incompatible API change. But
yeah, I'm not disagreeing that like the semantic versioning doesn't necessarily perfectly map onto the way in which a file system works like this, but I just wanted to discuss kind of what goes in this patch series branch, for example, that's just been opened up. Is a performance improvement or something that's like fixing a performance regression, is that a minor patch or not, for example? And I don't know the answer to that. I just wanted that to kind of be discussed in a larger forum, since I didn't see much activity on the issue I opened itself.
yeah, I think that just to kind of set the frame a little bit, the idea of like semantic versioning is like it's a bit of like language lawyering, and I think that it's easy for folks to be like, oh, but like we aren't going to make incompatible API changes, so like let's change the definition of what it is or whatever, which I think gets us further from doing things that are actually useful. And then I also hear you're asking about what do patch releases contain? When would we bump this version versus that version? I think that's like definitely a useful discussion to have, or a more useful discussion than like let's adopt semantic versioning, because in my opinion, like it does matter. Like the question of what we put into patch releases and what branches do we maintain in parallel for how long, et cetera, I mean, those are fundamental to the project and having releases at all. So I think maybe it would be helpful to first discuss that and kind of, Brian, maybe you want to talk about like what the approach has been to the patch releases and stuff.
Yeah, sure. So the policy up to now has basically been that we have major release branches. We've had 06, 07, 08. We're about to jump to 2.0. And the policy for them pretty much has been no new features, no undis format changes if we can avoid it if possible. So within a major branch, if you're compatible, you should be able to move forward or back within a branch. And then fixes for kernel build issues, that kind of thing go in. Performance changes if they're really important or critical and not that invasive, but a lot of it's kind of been on a, it's either a case-by-case basis sort of thing. You kind of look at a change. So if you can make a good case for why something needs to be in a release branch and it doesn't break something important, it's something we've considered in the past. And I think that's kind of the policy we'd like to have going forward. At least I would like to see going forward. We can have a 2.0 branch and it can be open to pretty much everything but major on-disk format changes, right? That it's going to break compatibility there. We'd like to keep the changes small and simple as possible, but you know, if there's a reason for something to be there, it's something we can consider.
Yeah, so
Presumably
like
about risk management, right? At the end of the day.
Yeah, people want something stable that they can run, that they know they can upgrade, and it won't, you know, it's an easy thing for them to track. And then, you know, the cadence of those things, that's, we've been shooting for a year, but that's all stuff for discussion, or exactly like what the subversions mean. I don't know that we've thought beyond, you know, 2. Whatever, what those second and third digits exactly mean. We could define what that's going to be and like the cadence for releases, if people have thoughts about that. We've been doing it about every 3 months at the moment, which maybe isn't quite frequently enough based on how fast the kernel moves, but it is a file system. So, you know, we want it to be stable and well tested. So
I will agree. Slow moving file systems are generally best.
So Gabriel, what, like, how does that map onto your thoughts about, you know, major versus minor releases?
In terms of like the concepts of what is included versus not included, that seems reasonable. You know, I have a generalized feeling that the very minorest of releases could be more frequent, but I think we just kind of mentioned that in some passing way, particularly when bugs creep up that in say not the core code, but the systemd stuff or something like that, where that kind of patch could probably come out a little bit quicker relative to the core code that could be released and fixed. But that's, you know, with the jump to 2.0, you have to define what does 2.1 versus 2.0.1 mean in that context.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
and how many branches do you do?
Yeah, so I think that's the big question. I mean, I think that what Brian said so far would mean that essentially there would only be 2 significant digits in the version number. Like there'll be 2.0 and then 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, 2.4, and there wouldn't be a third digit there. And I think that the reasoning is that it takes work to maintain multiple branches. Like if we were to actually have like a 2.0 and then a 2.0.1 and then, you know, a 2.1 and then a 2.1.1 and then like, oh, well, I want to patch that's against 2.0. So now I have it to do a 2.0.2. That is just a bunch more work. But if we wanted to basically say like, there's one branch for 2.0 and the next release might be, you know, if the current release is 2.1, the next release might be 2.2 or it might be 2.1.1, depending on kind of whatever content happens to be in there. But it's just one train of increasing numbers there.
Yeah.
I mean, that might be reasonable.
I think that could be manageable. Going back to the branch we just created against OpenZFS, I think maybe I should talk about that a little bit more. We did, in order to make this process easier for us, I mean, the reason we've had such long delays between point releases is because it takes a lot of work to pull all those fixes together and backport them and get them tested and make sure everything's stable. So it's been a couple months between. I was talking with Tony Hutter about this, and we created a staging branch going forward we're going to try to use for people in the community if they want to see a patch in the next point release, to open a pull request against that staging branch, and then we can review it and get it tested and merged. But being able to help allowing the community to help us get those patches ported and merged should help speed up the process, is at least what we're thinking, and we're willing to give it a try. So I'm hopeful that we may be able to see a little faster cadence. And then we're also working to automate our process for testing and building packages and more of that kind of thing. So we're hoping for some help.
I think you'd have quite a bit of interest on those branches, especially for supporting the newer kernels.
Yeah.
People to port that stuff early.
And I think merging it all into an existing branch, even if it's not tagged, is helpful for people too, because they can see what's queued up, what's merged. They can start testing that stuff. It may not be exactly that staging branch gets merged and becomes the next point release, but it'll probably be pretty close, right? We may add a few things to it, or testing may turn up some things, but that's the intent.
Right, thank you. I appreciate the discussion.
Joshua, did you want to reiterate any of the stuff that you typed in the chat?
Sure. I mean, my point is just, I think Semver, the focus of Semver, like, it makes a lot of sense in like library APIs, I think, where there's only sort of compatibility in one direction. That is the person who's like linking against the library and making function calls. But I think with a whole operating system or with a file system like ZFS, you've got like compatibility facing down, like the on-disk format. You've got compatibility facing up with library APIs, with system call, APIs, with the output format of commands and such. And I just think it's difficult to then have one idea of whether something is backwards compatible or incompatible, or like, I think honestly, like the time-based release model, if the goal is to get things out once a year, as a stable major, like I would probably just call them the April 2020 release or something, and then have clear established policies for as it seems that we really do for like disk format changes. We have a pretty tight idea of when, like, if you're going to add something incompatible, it needs to be a deferred update that you adopt on purpose as part of an upgrade. And that switching to new software doesn't just foist it on you. And, you know, otherwise I think it seems like we try to be pretty stable with respect to like the commands and stuff, so that people's scripts don't break. And, so I think releases of this many different kinds of software that are all kind of shackled together, it's difficult to put a Semver tag on that, I think, at least as Semver is written. So I kind of agree with Matt's assertion that this would result in as much like language lawyering, I guess, as like trying to fit that mold, I think. But I do agree it's extremely important to have like policies on all of those different things and the way that they can evolve.
On the topic of diversioning and stuff, do we have any plans or ideas on how we could come up with release notes more easily and so on? Like a couple of months ago, I was writing an article for the FreeBSD Journal about what stuff is coming in OpenZFS 2.0. And there's not really a concise list already built somewhere. And there's a lot of commit history since 0.8.
Yeah, this is a struggle I always have. Like every time a new major release comes out, I spend days usually writing release notes and going back through the commits. I would love a better system for this, but the only one I have at the moment is the commit history. Yeah. And proposals for how to do it better would be welcome.
Yeah, we have kind of the same problem in FreeBSD, and you know, commits maybe have a tag to say this is important enough that it should be mentioned in the release notes, but if it gets forgotten half the time, then that doesn't help either. And yeah.
The only thing that has ever worked for release note construction, in my experience, is having someone whose job that is, basically, and who chases people around looking for release notes.
In general, it's not been too bad with OpenZFS. It takes time to do, but the commit messages are detailed enough that usually you can go through the commits and, you know, figure out why it changes there and what it does and how important it is. So it's just a matter of spending the time to do it. But
Yeah, that's just it. It's a you can automate the collection process, but unless you want to have every single commit listed, you're going to need a human editor.
Yeah.
And that can take a little bit of time or a lot of time, depending on how much has gone on.
Yeah, I was wondering if there's something we can do, say, even just going forward, maybe using the GitHub projects interface or whatever to just kind of, you know, keep a list of that we can say, you know, once a month, maybe somebody can go through and be like, here's the things that happened this month that we will want to mention in the next release notes, and kind of amortize the cost of going through the entire commit history, and even maybe making
That
some of
should be
those notes,
doable.
well, it's fresher in people's minds too.
That should be quite doable and can easily be rotated among a set of volunteers.
Exactly. Which seems more scalable than making Brian do it all the time.
System
But
D.
making Brian do it all the time would be easier on everyone else.
I'm all for this plan. Project sounds good. Something.
System D have the news file in the master branch, which is updated every time when a feature is matched to the master. So whenever you go to the master, you have this list of the features added to the version, to the master. So every time they release new version, they just copy and paste this portion of the news file. That's simple text file. Everyone can, with the rights to the master, have ability to update it. So it doesn't require too many extra work to maintain that.
Yeah, that sounds like a decent way to manage it to me.
So then the idea would be with any major new feature or change, we require entry to the news file, basically. Describing what it is. Yeah, that would be.
Then we can also do
that's
it
how
after
it
the
works
fact.
in System D. Yeah.
If somebody forgets to do it, we can also do it after the fact.
Oh, sure.
So
Yeah.
we don't have to rely on like tags on commits or whatever.
Yeah, we do something kind of similar in previous D, except for with the updating file, although it usually is only for things that are going to cause you trouble when you're upgrading or something. But yeah, that concept maybe makes sense as a way to do it. And like Matt said, the fact that we can touch it up after means that it's not a big deal if something gets missed.
Yeah.
And you'd probably be caught during the pull request review and stuff anyway, right? It's like, make sure to add the news entry.
Yeah.
Cool. I think we've maybe strayed a little bit from the last topic about semantic versioning, but any more questions on this topic before we move on to the next one? All right, cool. So the next topic that we had was the L2ARC caching policy. Is from, I don't want to mispronounce your name, but Georgios?
I'm here, yes. Can you hear me? You can just call me
Yes.
George, it's fine.
Okay, sorry.
So there was some discussion recently on the issue list of GitHub on OpenZFS that perhaps the thought was that right now L2ARC caches both most frequently used and most recently used data and metadata, and the user is basically given the choice through a dataset policy or feature flag to change, to select between data and metadata or just metadata, but this still concerns most frequently and most recently used buffers. So the question was whether it would be useful as a feature to give the user the choice to select between MFU and MRU or only most frequently used data. Based on the fact that perhaps sometimes the user might copy a large file and they wouldn't want these to be cached in L2ARC, or in the case of a backup of a ZFS send, again, similarly, perhaps you wouldn't want the L2ARC be filled with this type of data and metadata. So based on this, I opened the draft pull request, implementing this behavior right now as a module parameter. I mean, that triggered some discussion on what would be the best case here, whether this would be desirable as a ZFS module parameter, or if it would be best to implement this as an additional option of the secondary cache feature flag, which again might cause compatibility issues. So given the interest on the draft pull request, I would like to hear some thoughts from the members that are present right now, or some additional feedback. It is interesting that Richard Erling mentioned something that I was not completely aware of, that perhaps in a specific scenario, if we are not caching MRU data in L2ARC, then we might have the case that the MFU data will gradually decline over time, which is a very interesting aspect. So, I mean, I would like to get some feedback in terms of if something like this, caching only MFU data, is desirable, and what would be the best way to do it, like as a ZFS module parameter or as a dataset property.
I think the question about whether it's a module parameter versus a dataset property kind of comes down to like how would we explain to end users or developers or sysadmins like what do you want to set this to and why? Like when would I want to change this from the default setting?
The most appropriate scenario I have in my mind is that you have a data set that you back up pretty often, and you wouldn't want, and you do this presumably by ZFS send, and you wouldn't want data from that backup to be cached onto the L2ARC. Again, this would eventually mean that the most reasonable way of implementing this would be as a dataset property. So in case you have different backup policies between different data sets, you could narrow it down to a specific one.
Well, so in that specific case, there's kind of two other solutions. One is if you're using ZFS send, it is not included in the L2ARC, and it is not included in the ARC either, as of a couple months ago when I made that change. So ZFS send doesn't add things to the ARC anymore, or L2ARC. But for other, you could be scanning it for other reasons, or using different backup software that could potentially cause it to go in there. But you could use like the secondary cache property to just say like, I don't want this data set to go onto the L2ARC at all. So I think that there's probably some more nuance to when you would want to change it. And I think that we would need to be able to clearly explain what that nuance is so that people can make a good decision about it. In general, like if it's kind of hard or impossible to explain to somebody, like, here's what you need, like, if I can't ask you a simple question that you can answer that tells me that then I can tell you what setting you should use for the property, then it probably shouldn't be a property. It should probably be something that either the system controls automatically, or we just provide a good default, and then like there's a module parameter for people that can put in the effort to like understand all the details about how the code works to figure out what works best for them. That's my perspective, at least.
Yeah, I agree. I think the problem is that it's hard to reason about. From an end user perspective, if there's a heuristic or something that we would want to employ within the ARC to say like, hey, we always kind of favor this type of behavior to avoid like, caching just randomly, cache data that may never be seen again. That's something that we can do, but I'm not sure that it would make sense to kind of expose that out. Because like Matt was saying, I don't know how you would say, oh yes, I want to make sure that, you know, that this type of query doesn't end up in my L2 arc, but it will end up in the arc. You know, so it's hard to kind of like differentiate between the two.
Yeah, we would need some way to like give the user observability so that they could see like, oh, you know, most of the L2 arc is being used for this type of thing that got like it's used for this data set, which, and then I wrote it because it was in the hit once, you know, MMFU list, but I don't want it to be in there, so therefore I can like turn that property to something else. But I think that we don't even have the observability of like which data sets data is in the arc or the L2 arc today, which is, you know, not great, but.
Yeah, and I'd just like to comment that there's a lot of nuance here.
Yeah.
And we spent a lot of time at a couple of companies back looking at how to change our policies, and it's really complicated. Or,
Yeah, I
or
mean,
let me
I
put
would
it this way,
definitely,
it's hard to match to the business case.
for sure.
Intellectually, I can dream up stuff, but matching it to a business case is difficult.
I think that it's great that you're looking at this. I mean, I would love to see more work on ARC and L2 ARC caching policy. I think that it's kind of like Richard was implying, it's really hard to know what a small change, what impact a small change will have on like the overall behavior of the system. And then like communicating that to the user is even harder. So we've kind of like sidestepped around that by just being like, the ARC, just like, we're just gonna kind of do what's best for you. Don't worry about it. Like it'll do something nice. And because of that, people I think haven't realized, for example, how poor the L2 ARC eviction policy is.
Shh, quiet, quiet, quiet. That's not
So I would love to see more work in this area and more investigation. I think we would need like a bunch of data before we could really tell users what they should be doing with this. I think that if we can kind of show, if we just want to change the default to be like, yeah, like now the L2 ARC only feeds from the things that have been hit more than once. I mean, that might be reasonable. We would just need some, you know, we need some data and some, you know, reasoning behind it. But that, to me, that's an easier change to sell than exposing it as a property.
I see. I see. I
Because
think
the bar is already low for like what's in the L2 ARC. It's like, what's in the L2 ARC? I don't know. Like it's stuff that you said L2 ARC, you know, or secondary cache eligible. Like it's some of that stuff, and it shouldn't be any of the stuff that you said is not eligible. But like, aside from that, there's really no observability, and it's just like we tell you, like you can observe the hit rate, you can observe how much stuff is in there, but you don't know what's in there or like why it's being evicted or anything about that. So changes to any of those kind of policies like are kind of, you know, whatever, we do the best we can.
And maybe the good first step here is we can add some instrumentation.
Yeah, I mean, I think that whenever I've kind of looked into these different areas, first it's like you add some observability, and then you're like, wow, that doesn't do what I thought it did, and
Right.
then you start turning knobs until you get it to sort of do what you want for like whatever workload it is that you're observing, and then you would try to reason about how it'll behave in other workloads.
Yeah, like I wonder if we could just even start with some new case stats that track, you know, this many bytes came from the hit once versus hit many list when they fed into the L2 arc or something.
Yeah, that
Sure.
would be easy.
If that counter doesn't already exist. I don't think it does, but
It does not, no.
I mean, I think that we saw recently there was a a bug where like the MRU MFU split was like being drastically miscalculated for I think years. So, you know,
Yeah.
So
there's
is
some low-hanging fruit here.
caching even really necessary?
Yes, but it probably only matters for like a small, you know, like 1 gig of cache is probably enough. One gig of cache and a strict MRU policy is good enough for a huge number of use cases.
And just out of interest, what is the CPU budget that we can spend on making the caching policy for the L2 arc more intelligent? Because, like, did anyone do measurements on that, or is it just okay as it is now?
The CPU that we're spending on it now, I mean, because it's just a bunch of lists, right? And all the operations on it are constant time. And now now that they're like multi-lists, you know, it spans over CPUs like pretty well. It scales with CPUs pretty well. The amount of like algorithmic complexity is like almost zero. But the per operation costs can be quite significant in some cases. Like if the cache eviction rate in terms of like blocks per second is high, then we definitely burn a lot of CPU doing that. But it's mostly not like determining what to evict. It's just like the mechanics of doing the eviction and dealing with like the arc buffers and KMM alloc, KMM free, that kind of stuff. Okay. So I think like if you have ideas of how to do it better,
I just
don't make it OVN, but like there's probably some room for spending some more CPU on that.
I just had a thought that maybe like if users want to have customizable policy, then I don't know, maybe just insert some Lua code that says, okay, everything in this directory I want to do that. I was just thinking, is that like possible, or would it add so much CPU overhead to the read, write, and eviction path that it wouldn't be feasible at all?
I think step one is some kind of scalable statistics gathering mechanism, which would inform subsequent decisions on whether we need to do anything else at all, I think. And also then if we do something else, to be able to test it to see if it's better. So I think that's probably the first thing to do.
Yeah, I think we don't have enough tests for L2 arc currently. I think I found a bug where the L2 arc threw away everything you read from it pretty badly.
Yeah, the good thing is L2 arc feed thread is really just one thread.
Right, but this was once you had something fed out to the L2 arc, you'd try to read it in from the L2 arc. It would compare the checksum incorrectly, even though the data was right. It was using the wrong size and calculating the checksum not on the block you were trying to read, but on only a fraction of it or more of it than you were reading. And then it would throw it away and read it from the real VDEV.
So in other words, like you never get a cache hit on the L2 arc.
Yeah, but you'd read from the L2 arc and then read from the other thing. So it's not just that you didn't get a hit, you just did 2 reads for the price of 1 instead of 1 every time.
Although I think that was only in the case where the arc was not compressed, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
That was only in that case, so it wasn't a common case. But.
Yeah.
Can we spend the last couple minutes on this thing I added to the agenda?
Yeah, let me just wrap up this one by saying, observability would be great. And I think that this applies to the arc as well as the L2 arc. Obviously, everyone is using the arc and not everyone is using the L2 arc. So, even just starting with observability of the arc, like how big is the arc? What is in it? When are we getting hits on, MRU versus MFU and stuff like that would be a wonderful area to investigate. Cool. So Joshua, go ahead with the dnode range lock stuff, range tree stuff.
I roped Patrick in. Patrick?
Yeah, I'd been seeing crashes on the debug kernel, and on further investigation, it looks like the range tree destroy stuff has been unsafe since forever. where essentially as that range tree is being torn down, we have to drop the lock on it, which lets other people come in and observe its state, which no one is supposed to touch it once you start tearing it down. And was hoping to get someone to take a look at either it's fine for dnode freed to just assume that it's not in that tree, or it's not, and we need to start tearing that range tree down in a safe manner. But with like someone's input on it who knows more about what valid observable state we want the system to see.
Yeah, that's probably me or maybe George. I can take a look at this.
Thanks, appreciate it.
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks for bringing it to our attention.
Is there an issue filed for that?
Yeah, he just added it to the doc.
There's one in OpenZFS and a corresponding one in Illumos.
Awesome, thanks.
And I'll paste into the chat here too. Cool. Yeah, we're almost out of time. Next meeting will be 4 weeks from now. And I think you will be at the earlier time. So September 15th, 9, I think, 9 o'clock Pacific time. Yeah, and the conference is coming up. I hope that you can all make it, and get in touch with me if you would like to lead a hackathon session.
Hey, Matt, could I steal like 30 seconds from this group? I just opened up an issue also on OpenZFS. I'm wondering if other people have seen kind of weird crashes. I think it affects only Linux, but it's an old commit that is in master today. It's been around since late last year, but it seems like there's a race accessing like the inode field of file structures. And we've kind of been seeing it for a little while. I did finally find the commit that kind of introduced this, but I don't know if others have seen kind of strange crashes. In these cases, it's not even like an NZFS code. It's like, kind of the kernel kind of accesses an inode and it blows up. But it presumably, like in our case, because we're running ZFS root, obviously there's ZFS is involved in some way. But maybe nobody else has been seeing this. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I watch most of the issues that come by, and I haven't seen anything quite like that reported.
Okay.
But at least we got an issue for it now.
Yeah, we'll keep digging into it. At least we know when it came in, but something to keep in mind if we have a release planning, it's being planned that might be impacted by this. Okay, thanks.
Cool.
Thanks. Was the code actually introduced there, or is it just moved? This looks like when a bunch of code got moved into the OS Linux directory.
Yeah, I could not reproduce it before this at all. So I think it really does seem like a race, given that there are instances that we're seeing where the inode structure is null, and then other instances where the inode structure was null at the time that the instruction was executed, but that when you look at it in the crash dump, it's been filled in. So almost like, we need some kind of, memory access barrier there in the code that maybe, happened to exist before, that got missed as part of the kind of the restructuring of some of this logic, but I haven't gotten to the bottom of that yet.
Cool. Thanks everyone for participating, and we'll see you in 4 weeks.